Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about A Tale of Time City by Diana Wynne Jones. So this book, I bought this book on a lark because I made the mistake of going down to the quarter without a book one day. And one of my tours that day just didn't happen, which meant I was left with about 3 hours to just wander the French Quarter without anything to do. And this is me, so yes, I ended up in the used bookstore. And I did not really intend to buy a book, but then I saw this one. And I used to love Diana Wynne Jones. She was one of my favorites. Like, I love the Chrestomanci books. They are fabulous. Howl's Moving Castle is wonderful and whimsical. And then I read Fire and Hemlock. And I was immediately turned off of her writing entirely. And not because of the actual writing. The book itself is well written, it's well composed, it's interesting. There's just a romance in that book that I find immensely squirky. And because of that, I just haven't picked up another Diana Wynne Jones book since then. But I saw this one, and it was cheap, and I was like, maybe it's time to give her another shot. And so, what is this book? Well, this is the story of a girl named Vivian Smith, who, when evacuating London during the bombings in World War II, gets sort of kidnapped by a pair of boys, and ends up in Time City. Time City exists literally outside of time, and something is very wrong with it. It seems to be crumbling, and that crumbling is either causing or being caused by disturbances out in history. And these two boys, Jonathan and Sam, believe that the disturbances are being caused by the Time Lady, a mythical figure who was married to Faber John, the man who invented and built Time City. And it seems the Time Lady and Faber John broke up, or fought, or something. It's a bit unclear, and for some reason they think that Vivian is the Time Lady, even though Vivian is like 11 and clearly not married to anyone. But soon Vivian is trapped in Time City, pretending to be Jonathan's cousin, because if anyone finds out she's from one of the unstable sections of history, they will be in a lot of trouble, and I mean all of them are going to be in a lot of trouble. All Vivian wants is to go home, or sorta, but as Time City devolves into chaos around her, she might end up having to help them figure out what or who is destabilizing the entirety of human history. Okay. So, I have some major problems with this book, and there are several of them. Some of them are bigger than others, and the reason I read this book to the end, because I was hating it by the first couple of chapters, is I was hating it in a really interesting way that felt like I was going to be able to autopsy it and really evaluate it and figure out what didn't work. And I'm not entirely sure that's what this is, but I am going to tell you some problems with it, and maybe we can all learn something here. But the first thing we're going to start with is character motivation. So, our main character is Vivian, and from the beginning her motivation should be so simple and so clear. She wants to go home. Easy. And of course, as the story progresses, she grows to like the people around her and care about them, and so she evolves the motivation of also wanting to save them, help Time City, and then go home afterwards. And she also realizes that saving Time City might be necessary to save all of history, and all of this is a very classic evolution of motivation. This all makes sense. This is a very normal character arc. The problem is, I never once felt any of that from the actual character. Like, I'm told she wants to go home. I'm not sure she does. From the beginning, she seems at most mildly annoyed that she's been kidnapped and dragged into a world wildly different than anything she has ever known. And I get the feeling that the idea here was to present her as this intensely strong, unshakable character. But instead, it sort of read as her just not caring about anything. And, like, the very first night when Jonathan tells her that she may never be able to go home, she doesn't panic or scream or try to run away or try to, fight him. She eats a snack and then goes to sleep. And through the rest of the book, she has numerous opportunities to try to go home without their help, and instead she just doesn't seem to think of trying to do any of it. She just follows along behind Jonathan and Sam, and every suggestion she makes is not towards trying to go home. It's this vague notion of, oh, if, I help them find the Time Lady, they'll send me home. And it's not her deciding, being here is more important. It feels like it literally did not occur to her to try anything outside of just convince Jonathan and Sam that they should take her home. Like, even once she learns how to go home, she doesn't do anything with that knowledge. And she thinks about how everyone is treating all of this as just an adventure instead of the serious threat it is. And this comes up multiple times where there are moments she's going, well, Jonathan's just treating this all as an adventure. And that is a great logical thing for a character to think. And that could be a great way to contrast with her, who is having, like, serious emotions about this. But she's not having them. Like, that would make so much sense if we saw even the slightest sign that she cared at all that she's been kidnapped. Like, she barely even thinks about going home. And there are just so many moments of her doing nothing, of her just letting the action go on around her. And instead of it making us feel like, oh, she's a character that doesn't have a lot of strength, or maybe she's a character that doesn't know how to take action, instead it literally just feels like she does not care. It feels like she is just watching the world go around her like a movie, which is also something that could have been presented as a serious character flaw, that she is the kind of person who just watches action, but it's not presented that way. The book trying to tell us that she's just a strong person who's doing active things, and we don't see her do any of them. She has a big outburst at one point about how no one in Time City cares about the people out in history, and it feels like it came from nowhere. Because beyond the occasional passing thought of, I hope Mom and Dad are all right back home, there's not a single sign that she cares about what's happening out to the people in history. And if you ignore what she says she wants, and instead look at what she actually does in the book, you do get an idea that she has a completely different motivation, or at least I did. I get the impression that what she really wants is actually to fit in like a normal citizen of Time City, and not get in trouble for lying about who she is. Like, that's all she wants. She wants to, like, go to school, live life, and not get in trouble. Which would be fine character motivation. It would be such a good story if it was focused on that. If it was, like, maybe she doesn't like her life at home in London. Maybe she does not have any friends there. She only has a loose attachment to her parents. Or maybe, like, this is the reason that a lot of these books have characters that are orphans. Maybe she doesn't have parents, so she's not worrying about people back at home. And therefore she can just be enamored with Time City. And all of this would have created an evocative emotional journey of her maybe being like, oh, this is scary, but this is really cool. I sort of want to be here. Now I gotta figure out how I can continue being here. And, like, I would have bought the idea that she was only going through the motions of trying to go home. Even if she had actually been really connected to her parents at home and been super concerned about them and felt really guilty about how much fun she was having here and how much she enjoyed Time City and being like, oh, but now I'm torn because I want to go home and see my mom and dad, but also Time City is fucking cool, I don't want to go home. But we don't get that. We don't get any of those feelings. All we get is this girl who just follows along with Sam and Jonathan and occasionally thinks things like, oh, I wonder what home is doing right now. I wonder when I'll be able to go home. I'm gonna go to school. Okay, I'm a bit worried about school because I don't know enough there. And it just makes it so hard to connect with this character because it feels like she does not care about anything. And that makes it really hard for us to care about her. Now, I will say the other characters, a lot of them were a lot stronger. I understood their motivations. I understood their quirks. They felt like a lot of Diana Wynne Jones' characters. A lot of her side characters are sort of, yeah, they're a little bit flat, but they're flat in a fun way. They're flat in that way that, like, the person that you see downtown every single day that's just a little bit weird, and you know nothing about him, he's just a little bit weird. They feel like that, and that's fine. They worked in the story. There were a couple, like, honestly, there were too many side characters in this book. There were a couple that kept coming up, and I was going, who the hell is Petula again? And also, what kind of name is Petula? Like, is that a name? Is that how I'm supposed to pronounce it? I don't know. And, like, Mr. Inkian, I'm like, okay, he's referenced, like, 3 or 4 times, and I'm just going, I don't remember who that guy was. Was he Sam's dad? No, that was Mr. Donegal. And moments like this kept happening, but otherwise the characters were fine. But I do want to move on to the biggest thing that bothered me in this book, and that is world building. The world building in this book is a hot mess. Like, oh my god. In the first, like, 3 or 4 chapters, I was actually considering putting the book down immediately because the world felt completely hollow. It felt like a room full of cardboard cutouts. And I'd assumed this book would be fantasy because it's a Diana Wynne Jones book, and, like, everything I've read by this author is fantasy. But I quickly went like, oh, okay, no, this is sci-fi. But it's soft sci-fi. And soft, like, soft-serve ice cream in summer sunlight soft sci-fi. And I was like, okay, I mean, sure. And, like, everyone's wearing what our protagonist refers to as pajamas. And, like, I'm guessing it's meant to be, like, tracksuits kind of thing. But, like, futuristic tracksuits that when they put them on, they automatically zip up. And, like, bits light up on them and stuff like that. Ooh, fancy. And, like, there are automats where you can get food from all the different centuries just by pushing a few buttons. There's time locks that allow patrols to time through time travel, and there are skyscrapers and holographs, and all of this stuff is very sci-fi. But beyond a few meaningless, made-up jargon terms that Vivian dismisses as boring nonsense and doesn't even give us the full description of what the person said, we don't get the slightest explanation of how any of this works. And, like, I'm not really fond of hard sci-fi. Honestly, if you give me actual scientific explanations of how shit works in books, I'm probably gonna either stop paying attention, overanalyze whether or not it actually makes sense, or completely stop reading to go look it up in the real world because I want to know if that's real science. But the problem here is what sci-fi world building exists in this book feels like 1960s low-budget sci-fi movie world building. Like, think about the sci-fi set dressing that I listed as what's sci-fi in this book. That's like the equivalent of having a fantasy book where the only fantasy stuff is people wearing tunics, eating turkey legs, wizards wearing pointy hats, and castles. Like, sure, that's fine background detail, but there needs to be a bit more for it to actually feel lived in and to feel like a real world. And the world building did get a bit stronger as we progressed in one way, but it got a lot worse in other ways. For one thing, it sort of shifted from sci-fi into fantasy. We started to get more things that felt very fantastical. Things like old legends, magical objects, M.C. Escher-inspired architecture, and eventually even a direct reference to magic. Like it is said, Faber John learned magic. And when I read that word, magic, I literally stopped and went, wait, I'm reading a sci-fi. Is this a science fantasy? Like, is that what's going on here? And I thought about it and I realized that no. What had been going on for a long time is this is not a sci-fi. It's a fantasy dressed up in a sci-fi costume. But it's not even a good costume. It's like one of those costumes you get at Party City that shows this really cool outfit on the front bag. And when you get it home and pull it out and start putting it on, you realize that all the bits that made it look good were accessories that are not included. And that you have to go back and buy on their own. And you can't afford to buy them on your own, so you would just end up with a crappy little costume. And in the end, it does read stronger as a fantasy. But that's largely because fantasy, especially that for middle grade readers, can be a lot softer than sci-fi. Like, you can get away with an entire world built on hand-wavy, don't worry, it's just magic. How did Faber John build Time City? Don't worry, it's magic. Why was the figure below the city so big? Don't worry, it's magic. Why does the android have really bad aesthetic taste? Don't worry, it's magic. But I mentioned that the world building also, as it got stronger, it also got a lot more problematic in other ways. Some were small, like Vivian calling buildings ultra-modern in Time City, which, why is that a problem? Because, like, you know, we're outside of time, some buildings might be ultra-modern, because she's from 1939, and even I, who, like, I have a good basic structure in my mind of architectural history. Like, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I can usually look at a building and tell you, like, a general estimate of the century it was built in. And I have no idea what she actually would think of as modern. And, like, that's because, like, I know what buildings were being built in 1939 as ultra-modern. And I know that those are what we now think of as, like, classic skyscrapers. Think of things like the Empire State Building. But there are multiple times that she references something as being made of metal and glass, and that sounds a lot more like post-World War II skyscrapers. And only once does she describe something as looking futuristic, and that is also described as being made of sculpted glass, which puts me in mind for buildings like the Shard and the twisty skyscrapers of Shanghai, that kind of structure. And, like, I know this is a really petty thing to mention, but it kept coming up. And every time it did, it was super distracting to me, because my brain wanted Vivian to be more awed by what she was seeing. Not just go, oh yeah, that's modern looking. Like, I wanted her to be thrown, or to have a bit more confusion. I wanted her to look around and go, I've never seen something that looks like that before. And most of the time she's not. She's walking by, like, lit up arches that, you know, create music, and she's going, yeah, this makes sense, yeah, this is normal, this is modern. And I'm like, in what stretch of the imagination? Are you really from 1939? Like, there are many times I was actually beginning to wonder, is the twist going to be that she actually is the Time Lady? And the reason everything seems just sort of mundane to her is because she actually has been here before? And, like, if Time City really does have architecture from all over time, there should be something in the landscape that makes her go, oh my god, is that even a building? I didn't know structures could look like that. Like, how does that work? And the only time we get anything like that is when she's in the library structure, and it's only on the inside, and, like, things start twisting around in MC Escher kind of style, and that feels 100% like magic, so it does not feel like a time period thing at all. And this girl is sitting here looking at, like, steel and glass skyscrapers, giant blue domes, tilting towers, and just goes, that one looks super modern. I'm like, what does it mean? And, like, sometimes she'd look at something and go, that looks old. And I'm like, give me a description. Tell me what you are talking about. And I kept wondering, is this meant to look modern to Vivian? Or to Diane Wynne Jones? And that is not something I should be thinking in an immersive story. Like, yes, if the narrator is a character in the story, like a good example is the Series of Unfortunate Events books. The narrator very much is a character in those books. There are moments that you know he is the one thinking things, it is not the kids. And that's fine. And that's great for younger kid books because it allows an outside voice who knows more to explain things and to give us more of an image of what's going on. But this is not one of those books. This is third person, but it's very close third person. This is the kind of third person where you're not supposed to be thinking about the narrator. You're supposed to be focusing in on the character and basically imagining this as Vivian talking to us, just, you know, we're sort of behind her head instead of her standing next to us explaining what's going on. And because of that, I should not be wondering, is this modern to a girl from 1939? Or is this modern to an author writing in 1987? And this is a bit of a tangent, but I really was bothered that Vivian is able to remember all these complex place, tech, and titles, like the Genoman, the Mnemonin, I don't know how to pronounce it, the Polarities, the Sempitern, the Chronologue, and the Perpetuum. But the only word that she stumbles over from this new modern world, this place outside of time that for some reason speaks the exact form of English that she speaks, that has the exact same linguistic quirks, that doesn't have any problems with her, you know, period accurate slang, the only word that gives Vivian a problem is holograph. Why holograph? Like, I accepted that we were just getting all these terms from the narrator, and that Vivian probably did not actually remember, you know, what the Sepatern actually meant. I was assuming that she was thinking, oh yeah, that guy, and the narrator was filling in, that guy is the Sempitern, or whatever. But then we get to the moments where she hears the word holograph, and she just keeps saying things like holographic, no, she said gramophone most of the time, but other times she said other things that just were not holograph, and I'm like, why is she having a problem with this word? She's from 1939. She would have known what a phonograph was, and if you know what a phonograph is, it's not that hard to figure out how to say holograph. In fact, at one point she calls it a hollow phonograph, and I'm like, oh my god, she would not have a problem with this. And, like, I know this is a stupid thing, but it drove me nuts. And it was for like 3 chapters that the word kept coming up, and she kept being like, I don't know what that word is. And I'm like, you don't know what any of these words are! And all of this just made the world building feel more grating, more empty, more inconsistent. But finally, to the meat and potatoes of what I really dislike about this book. I don't think the magic of the world makes sense in the least. And the more it was explained, the worse it got. So full-on spoilers ahead. I don't even care. Like, if you want to read a Diana Wynne Jones book, I do encourage you. This one is not on my list of recommendations. Like, go ahead, read one of the others. Hell, even Fire and Hemlock, it's fine. But the basic premise here is that time is almost, but not quite, a circle. It's sort of a horseshoe shape with an empty space in the ends, and that's where Time City is. But it's also moving backwards across time, and it's outside of time entirely, and I'm sort of okay with all that illogicality. The innate paradoxes of time travel sort of call for world building that does not make sense, that makes your eye twitch, that, like, if you are a person that lives in chronological time, it makes sense that you cannot wrap your head around, like, living outside of chronological time. But then there's the stable versus unstable eras. So Time City trades with all and interacts with all the people from all over the timeline, and it's pretty much directly said that the general population on all these timelines know that Time City exists and has records of all of human history's time and knows everything that's going to happen, and they can basically, you know, tell you exactly what's going to happen in your future, and you can just get a passport to visit this place or even study long term here, though they do restrict you from being able to get access to science from the future so you do not learn it a bit too soon, but only if you're from a fixed era. And what is a fixed era? Well, the time that history stays on the same track. Every time you visit, everything will be roughly the same. And sure, I'll buy that. Like, it's a bit stupid in my opinion, but it's not that far from the idea of fixed moments, which is pretty normal for time travel narratives. There's usually a moment or two in history that have to happen basically exactly the same way for the universe to still exist. Or no matter what you do, that moment will happen. Like, you can try to stop Pompeii, Mount Vesuvius from erupting, but Pompeii Day is inevitable. That concept is very time travel normal. But they're usually moments, not entire millennia of history. And like the impression I got here is there are significantly more stable and fixed periods than there are unstable periods in history. And like, I'm not sure this makes sense. Like, sure, whatever, I'll run with it. And then the second you introduce unstable eras, which can change and shift, everything falls apart entirely. First, there's the fact that no one within unstable periods is supposed to know that Time City exists, and yet a lot of these unstable periods happen between and all of the unstable periods happen between 2 of the stable periods, and therefore there was time before where everyone knew Time City existed, and then suddenly we hit an unstable era and nobody knows Time City exists? Excuse me? How does that work? And then there's just like, what does an unstable period really work like? Because, like, it falls apart the second you think about it. Because if World War II can literally shift from all over time, like, maybe it starts in 41, maybe it starts in 39, maybe it starts in 37, ooh, now it's starting in 35. Then also napalm can be invented, like, 50 years early, or atomic energy could be invented, like, whenever, like, there can be no fixed time in history if these events can shift around whenever the fuck they want to. At all. And like, yeah, some of the examples I just cited are from after history has gone critical, and that means the unstable eras have gotten so bad they're destabilizing the fixed eras. But what can that even mean? Like, what does an unstable period usually look like? Is it just that World War II only shifts a day or two instead of years? Or is there any kind of stability that's not just things moving around on the timeline? Because the implication here is it's just things moving around on the timeline. And if things are moving around on the timeline, that would affect what happens, not just when it happens. Like, you know, if napalm's invented and used in early World War I, would we have the Korean War? We don't know. Would we have anything? I don't know. Like, would, George W. Bush have been born if this happened during World War I? I don't know. That's not how time works. And, like, just all of this bothered me so much. You can tell because my voice is just going up into the very upper edges of my register. Like, oh my God. And I think, like, most of us have a basic understanding that in time travel narratives, changing things in the past is going to change the future. Either that or you're stuck with an innate paradox where it's impossible to change things in the past because you've already changed them and therefore they are the way they're going to be. And this book sort of just says, nah. Some things can change, but that doesn't change the fixed errors. Unless it's gone critical, and then it changes everything. And then the entirety of history is destabilized, which might destroy Time City. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't get the logic here. And every time we go out into history, like, the same, like, the cosmetic things have changed, but the big things are the same. Like, there's an evacuation train that arrives no matter what else is happening in history. Like, oh, this train is now arriving powered by atomic energy, but it's still arriving at the exact same time and place with the exact same load of children. And I'm like, what? None of this makes sense. And, like, we get no idea at all what the fixed errors are like. Are they literally the exact same no matter what you do? And maybe I'm weird here, but if the fixed errors know that only the fixed errors can interact with Time City, and therefore Time City knows their history and their future, and therefore their future is solid and cannot change, why would you do anything, ever? Like, if you know that nothing you can do can change your future, why would you do anything? And, like, I cannot stop questioning how any era can be fixed if there is such a thing as instability in history. And why is it more logical to have people from Time City interact with the fixed errors than the unstable errors? Like, if you're throwing people who grow up with knowing the entire history of humanity from start to end into an era where things are supposed to stay absolutely stable and never change, wouldn't that be slightly more dangerous of causing changes and destabilizing things than throwing them into the eras that are already unstable? Like, I don't understand. And throughout all this, I kept expecting there to be a twist, where it was explained that there is no real difference between the unstable and the fixed eras, and that someone just didn't want people to visit the unstable eras, so they made up this excuse to prevent the people from Time City to go to that era. And, like, it would have even made sense, because that's where a certain magical object was hidden. And so, like, logically, maybe they would want to have those roped off as no-go zones. But no, it's never actually explained that way. Or, like, maybe it turns out that for some nefarious reason, the people in Time City are trying to keep history on one track that it's not really supposed to be on. Like, I will admit I'm thinking of Kang the Conqueror from the MCU. Like, that kind of logic. Like, maybe that's what's going on. And nope, that's not what's going on either. And I was thinking that maybe the ending of this book was going to be them suddenly realizing that time should be set free to do with as it wants. Like, time should be able to, like, shift as it feels necessary. But no! The ending we actually get in this book is the, okay, now we reset everything to normal kind of ending. Which, if you take 2 seconds to think outside of the narrative of this book, makes everyone absolutely monstrous. Because the normal we're resetting to is World War II happening. And I guess that means the people in Time City are perfectly okay with the Holocaust going on and not doing anything about it. And then we get to the actual twist. Time City is itself an unstable era. Ooh. And the great thing is it's not even a fucking twist, because it was told to our characters 50 pages before it becomes a twist. Like, we are literally told that Time City is an unstable era. We go another, like, 100, it might even be a full 100 pages, with them going, okay, and then suddenly they realize Time City is an unstable era! Oh my god! And the twist is there because the magical object has to be in an unstable era, and it's in Time City. And it completely breaks the logic of the entire machine. Because if Time City is unstable, and unstable eras are too dangerous for people to interact with for fear of destabilizing a fixed era, then logically the people from Time City should not be allowed to go into a fixed era because they're from an unstable era. And I'm like, none of this makes sense! And yes, this is a book for kids. But I feel like even kids would be going, I'm not sure this really logics out. And it broke my ability to care about anything else, because all I could think about was trying to break down the paradoxes inherent in the concept here. And like, worlds don't have to make sense with our world's physics. They don't have to make sense if it was in our world, but they do have to make internal sense. They have to have logic with themselves. And this felt like one of those things that was a vaguely cool idea that didn't get enough thought put into breaking it to pieces. And when the world building is deeply broken at its foundation, everything else crumbles underneath it. Like, it's hard to care about characters when you are trying to make sense of an illogical premise. And in the end, I think the biggest lesson that I'm going to take away from this book entirely is sometimes it's 100% better to keep your world super simple than to overcomplicate it. Beyond that, there are a couple of small things I want to discuss. I also found the exploration of the city itself just incredibly boring. Like, most of it is just a list of place names with maybe a one-line description. Like, here's the Pendulum Gardens that hang above the city. What do they look like? I don't know. Are there flowers? I mean, I assume so. Does the bottom look like dirt or stone or metal or more flowers? I don't know, it's not explained. And yes, middle grade readers would not probably sit still for page after page after page of physical description, but I also don't think they will sit still for 6 pages that are just listing, and then we went to the hereafter. It was a tower. And then we went to Aeon Square, where there was a market. And then we went to a cafe and bought snacks. We bought snacks with our belt where we hit a button and it showed our credits. Also, I did keep getting the faintest whiffs of racism in this book that got worse and worse as the book went on. Like in the beginning, we know Jonathan's last name is Lee. He is described as having folded eyes. And then there are just a couple of times in passing where Sam, who is his best friend, calls him a slant-eyed meanie. And I was like, okay, but maybe that means something different in this world. This is fantasy. And then Jonathan is described as having a pigtail, and his dad is described as having a yellowish face and a top knot. And I'm like, this is getting a little bit, And then a passing line mentions that his ancestors wandered into Time City from China. And I'm like, that's a choice. Yep, there are choices. And I do not understand why. If the character was of Asian descent, we didn't just have Vivian saying, Jonathan looked a bit Asian, or half Asian. She's from 1939, not 1439. She would know what Asian people look like. And like, if you want to avoid all the complicated and probably problematic feelings that a girl from 1939 might have about someone from China, then don't have her be from 1939. Like, a lot of this book I feel like would have been fixed if you did not have her be from 1939, and instead had her be from 1987 when the book was actually written. And like, sure, like, why would you then have a character who's supposed to be likable call his best friend a racial slur? Sorry for the handheld camera, but I forgot to say this. I did look it up just to make sure that this is not somehow a new racial slur that Diana Wynne Jones might not have known was racist. But no! It was a racial slur going back to the 1860s. It was very common in World War II, which means that not only would Diana Wynne Jones know that that was racist, so would Vivian. And like, overall, all I can really say about this book is I walk away from it without many good feelings. I may not read any new Diana Wynne Jones books after this.